Shabbat Shalom. I want to start this morning with a little game. Okay, it's a game that I'm going to call Sacred Name That Tune. Okay, I'm going to sing a little snippet, and you're going to tell me from where in our liturgy it's from. Okay, and if you know it, great, just shout it out. And if you don't know it, that's fine. You'll know it by the end of the Dvar Torah. Okay, everybody ready? Hagadol, Hagibor, veHanorah. The Amidah. It's from the very beginning of the Amidah. Every single Amidah has these words describing God as Gadol, Gibor, veNorah. Great and powerful and awesome. Okay, very good. You win. Kakatu ve'achalta ve'savata uve'rachta. Benching, Birkat Hamazon. Good. We say this after we eat, expressing our gratitude for our food. Excellent. Third one. V'natati metartzechem b'ito yorel malkosh. Shema, I heard. Let's get a little more specific. Second paragraph of the Shema. The second paragraph of the Shema, which we say twice a day, V'haya im shamoa, is the second paragraph. Okay, what do these things have in common? This is the bonus point. What do these three things have in common? They're all in the Parsha. They're all in this week's Parsha. They are all pieces of phrases of biblical verses of psukim, and they all appear in the Parsha this week. And they were selected by Chazal, by our sages, to become part of our daily liturgy, right? They're each part of the daily liturgy. So why were these selected? And that's what I want to consider this morning. What can we understand more deeply about these words when we look at them in the context of where they appear in the Torah? Okay, and I hope that will help us understand a little bit more why these words were selected, why they're part of our daily liturgy, and maybe we can appreciate their depth a little more and have more of an inroad into making these parts of our tefillah more meaningful. Okay, so the first phrase, Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, veHanorah, very powerful language. God is great and heroic and mighty and awesome. And what do we think of when we say these words? I would say what mostly comes to mind. Actually, we see these words in other places describing God as powerful and awesome. And they're kind of what you would expect, describing the God who brought the plagues to Egypt, right? Who split the Red Sea, the God of Revelation. Really, these very big, powerful images of God as supernatural power, supernatural miracles. But let's see where they appear in our Parsha today. So you can take a look in your Chumash at page 1049. This is chapter 10, verses 17 to 19. God here is described as Hagadol, Hagibor, veHanorah, who shows no favor and takes no bribe, upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and befriends the stranger, providing him with food and clothing. You too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. God's greatness in our Parsha is not about physical strength, is not about miracles, is not about the supernatural. It's about chesed. It's about morality, the ethical treatment of people. Rav Yosef Soloveitchik, in his book Words of the Heart, he writes about this pasuk and its selection for being part of our daily Amidah, God's might is not concentrated only in the dynamic that governs the cosmic process, but extends into the moral realm as well. Mightiness is modeled on chesed. Mightiness is modeled on chesed. The ear of the individual at prayer is bent to receive the whisperings of the moral law. Isn't that gorgeous? What a beautiful and powerful idea. That God's greatness, when we proclaim God's greatness every day, 3 times a day, sometimes 4 times a day, sometimes 5 times a day, depending on where we are in the calendar and how many times we say the Amidah, we proclaim a vision of greatness and mightiness and power that is rooted in the moral. So when we say these words ourselves, we can bend our ear, as Rav Soloveitchik suggests to us, bend our ear to the whisperings of the moral law. And I would say what we're being asked to do every time we say these words is to internalize this truth for ourselves, that chesed, compassion, and justice, this is what it means to be great and mighty. That these are the underpinnings of a society, of a moral system. This is the greatness of God that we are meant to emulate, because we are taught elsewhere in the Parsha to follow in the ways of God. Okay, chesed, compassion, morality, put that there. The second snippet, ve'achalta ve'savata uve'rachta. Chapter 8, verse 10, you can look at page 1041. We only have these 3 words in Birkat HaMazon. You eat, you are satisfied, and you bless. And naturally, and rightfully so, we think of these words as an expression of gratitude. Thank you, God, for what we have eaten. But we have to look again at the context in which these words appear. And if you read through verses 8 to 18, what you're going to see, or 11 to 18, what you're going to see is not so much a conversation about gratitude, but a conversation about an aspect of human nature that we might not want to admit. And so when our sages said, take these words and say them in Birkat HaMazon, what they're saying is, think back also to what is being said here. What is being said here? That when we are satisfied because we've grown our food and we've produced something and we've eaten and it's all comes from us, we might think that it really does all come from us. Ram levavecha, our hearts might grow big and swelled. Our hearts will swell, not with pride, but with arrogance. We might say, Kochi ve'otzem yadi, it was my own strength and the power of my own hand that brought me all of this goodness. And we forget, or we have the potential to forget about God. So there's a spiritual danger in success that this passage is trying to convey to us. It's very easy, it's too easy, to forget that God is the source of everything. And so we become haughty, we become arrogant, we become a little too full of ourselves. And so what we are doing when we say these words, ve'achalta, ve'savata, uve'rachta, is we are holding in our mind everything that's being conveyed here and cultivating both gratitude but also humility. That's the beauty and the power of what our sages are offering to us when they put these words into the grace after meals, the Birkat HaMazon, the prayer that we say as many times a day as we eat or eat bread. So humility. Let's put that over here. The third example, you can turn to page 1052 or 1053. And this is the second paragraph of the Shema that we recite daily. It begins V'haya im Shemoah. Last week we read the first paragraph of the Shema in our Torah reading, Ve'ahavta, and many of the words and the phrases and the mitzvot that appear here also appeared last week. So it seems a little bit repetitious. Why do we need to have both paragraphs or both passages included in our daily Shema? Why do we have to say both of these things every day? Yeshayahu Leibowitz, Israeli public intellectual and scholar, he suggests that these two passages reflect two different types of faith. Ve'ahavta, if you look at it, it doesn't speak at all of reward and punishment. It just says very simply, love God, follow these mitzvot, say these words, teach them to your children, put them in your mezuzot and your tefillin. That's it. It's a religious posture of observing the mitzvot, lishma, he says, for their own sake. Okay? And for some people, that's an easy religious posture. For some people, we need a little bit more incentive. And so V'haya im Shemoah brings with it reward and punishment. Do these things and you'll be blessed. Don't do these things and you will be punished. Okay, I think that's fair. I have a lot of experience with people who are motivated by reward and punishment. They're quite tiny. So I want to look a little bit more closely at this idea because on a certain level, it sounds right. We know that it's true in our world. We see this aspect or this idea expressed in our relationships, in our laws. But the way that it's written here and the way that it appears in much of the Torah is really theologically quite troubling. Because is it really true? Is it really true that famine and drought and war and sickness is a punishment for sin? And that a bountiful harvest and a rising stock market and everyone having what they need is a reward for good behavior? We know that that's not actually true. So I want to suggest that we can read this passage less as reward and punishment and more as an expression of the natural consequences of our behavior. A lack of care and reverence for the world that we inhabit, the earth and the people, whether it's born out of selfishness or thoughtlessness or ignorance, it will naturally lead the world to be less and less hospitable to us, ecologically, morally, socially, spiritually. We are seeing that now. We see that so boldly in the world that we live. And so this passage, I would argue, is not trying to cultivate fear of punishment, but is trying to cultivate responsibility. What is our responsibility so that the world doesn't end up looking a certain way? Let's recap. Chesed, humility, I think it was chesed, humility, and responsibility. These are three attributes for people who are building a holy society. And that's what Bnei Israel are going to do. That's why these ideas appear here, because this is what Moshe is doing throughout the entire book of Deuteronomy. He's saying you're about to build a society and enter the land and establish your courts and your codes and your neighborhoods and all the ways that you interact. And here's what you have to remember. And I'm not saying anything new here, right? This is very clear when we read the book of Deuteronomy. But what I want to leave you with is an appreciation for the profound wisdom of our sages, for having chosen these specific passages to include in our liturgy. Compassion, justice, humility, responsibility, we can only cultivate these traits in ourselves through regular practice. We can't just wake up and say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to be humble. Right? We have to work at it. Right? There's spiritual work that has to happen, and the rabbis knew this. And so they built a way for us to do this in our daily prayer. So now we understand, or we can understand the full implication of these words and how these words are meant to affect us when we pray. Prayer, I don't know if it affects God. Maybe, maybe not. I know plenty of my prayers have not been answered. But prayer affects us if we allow it to. And so every day, multiple times a day, our tradition asks us to open our hearts and to be moved by the prayers and all that they're meant to express, so that we can become the people and the world we are meant to be. Shabbat Shalom.